Hi, I'm Seraphine. I retired after 35 years of service, planned, saved, hoped for peace. But 10 days after my farewell speech, I was locked out of my own home. My daughter emptied my accounts and handed me a brochure for a retirement center with a smile. 42 missed calls later, I still haven't heard a single apology. What do you do when the child you raised rewrites the story and erases you from it? Because what hurt most wasn't the money. It was realizing she had planned it for years while still calling me Mom. Retirement was supposed to feel like peace. After 35 years in law, I expected a quiet shift into stillness. Not this. That morning, my coworkers had showered me with flowers and framed certificates. The luncheon speeches had praised my grace under fire, and I'd smiled like I believed them. I even remember the way my daughter Isolde leaned close during dessert, her voice low and honey sweet. "You deserve something just for you, Mom," she said, slipping an envelope into my hand. 3 days of rest, a vineyard in Fredericksburg, no responsibilities, no headlines, no clients, just wine, a view, and your own thoughts. I blinked. "You planned this?" She nodded. "You never stop. Now you can." It should have made me feel seen. Instead, my stomach turned the way it does when a judge gives a verdict too quickly. Still, I told myself it was just the nerves of transition, the residue of being needed too long by too many. I didn't want to question kindness. The next day, I drove out. The vineyard was lovely, wildflowers dusting the trails, warm sun humming on the hillsides. I let my shoulders fall, let the silence seep in. At night, I journaled, trying to remember what I even liked doing before courtrooms and case briefs took over. The staff were courteous but distant. We valued disconnection here. The manager had smiled when I asked about cell service. A few days off the grid resets everything. I nodded, though the lack of contact left me unsettled. No calls from Isolde. No, just checking in. But maybe that was the point. I needed space. She said so herself. When I returned on the third afternoon, the sunlight had started to bend orange, laying long shadows across my driveway. I pulled out my key card and held it to the scanner. The lock didn't blink. I tried again. Nothing. Thinking the battery had died, I reached into my purse to call maintenance, then noticed the text blinking on my screen. "The house is no longer yours. We need space. I've updated the locks." It was from Isolde. I stared at the message for a full minute, as if reading it longer might change its meaning. No longer yours. She didn't say my house, just not mine. The home I'd bought 15 years ago, the mortgage I paid, the address on every legal document I owned. I stood on the porch with my suitcase still beside me as dusk deepened and the wind picked at the corners of my blazer. No key, no code, no warning. I pressed the bell once, twice, no answer. The porch light flicked on automatically, casting my reflection in the glass. I sat down on the steps. The concrete was still warm from the day, but I felt cold all over. 10 minutes passed, then 20. I checked my phone again. No missed calls, nothing from Isolde. A boy from down the street, one of the neighbor's grandkids, I think, rode by on his bike, slowing just enough to wave. "Hi, Ms. Laurent. Heard your daughter's doing renovations." I smiled, reflexively, even as something inside me cracked. Renovations. That's what this was called now. I tapped Callista's name in my contacts. She picked up on the second ring. "Sarah, I think Isolde just stole everything from me." Silence. Then her voice lowered into that tone only lawyers have when they know it's serious. "I'm listening." I watched my reflection fade into the darkening glass. My porch lights were flickering off now, sensors sensing no one lived here. Inside the window, a figure passed across the kitchen, my kitchen. Someone moved behind the blinds like they belonged there. And I was still standing outside, but someone else was already living in my life. The hotel clerk barely looked up when I approached the desk, wheeling my suitcase like a ghost in my own city. She handed me a key card to a room on the 3rd floor. No welcome, no smile, just protocol. I didn't blame her. I probably looked like someone between homes, which I suppose I was. Inside the room, the air was chilled too low and smelled faintly of lemon disinfectant. I sat on the edge of the stiff bed and reached for my phone. My hand hesitated, knowing what I was about to see. Still, I tapped into my banking app, praying I was wrong. The balance read 0. A flicker of nausea hit me. I blinked, tapped View Recent Activity. Pages of transactions scrolled upward, deposits rerouted, savings drained, each marked with terms like internal relocation support and financial delegation transfer. Clean terms, neutral language, cold theft. I let the phone drop onto the bedspread, not smashed, not thrown. Just let it fall, like the weight of everything else I'd built. A lifetime, gone with a password and a pen. When I returned to the lobby for water, the clerk handed me an envelope. This was left here earlier today, ma'am. It has your name. No return address. My name printed neatly. Inside, a trifold brochure for a senior living facility. Golden Seasons. The cover showed a woman my age holding a puzzle piece, smiling beside a fireplace. Tucked into the fold was a yellow, sticky note. You'll be safe here. No responsibilities, just rest. Isolde. My fingers didn't tremble, but my stomach nodded. Rest. That's what this was called now. Not abandonment, not theft. Just rest. I walked slowly back to my room, the envelope still open in one hand. The kind of calm I felt wasn't peace. It was a pause before something breaks. I sat at the small desk and dialed Callie. She picked up with a low, cautious tone. It's happening, I said. What exactly? She took the money, all of it, and she left me a brochure for a retirement home. Silence, then the scratch of a pen on her end. You still have access to your account? No, she moved everything, even used words like relocation support. It's clean, professional. Callie's voice dropped into that tone only seasoned lawyers use. We'll meet first thing in the morning. Don't panic, Sarah. Don't go silent. Go smart. I set the phone down and exhaled. The room's walls, painted a muted beige, seemed to close in tighter with each passing minute. No photos, no books, just the hum of the air conditioning and the buzz of a vending machine down the hall. I scanned the furniture, generic, untouched. This wasn't home. It wasn't even comfort. It was a pause button. The last dinner we'd had together floated into memory. Isolde had made reservations downtown. She'd asked about my favorite dessert, talked about letting go and the next chapter. I'd believed she was trying. Now those phrases sounded like rehearsals. I didn't cry. I didn't let it break me. Instead, I pulled a notepad from my purse and wrote 3 columns: bank contacts, legal files, and property titles. Then I started drafting what I knew: dates, passwords I'd shared just in case, moments that now felt like traps I walked into smiling. The night came on slow, stretching shadows along the baseboards. I turned off the TV I hadn't touched and stared at the glow of the charging port beside the bed. My phone buzzed once, just a bank alert. Suspicious login attempt. 10:42 p.m. IP, Austin, TX. She was still moving money. I stared out the window. Across the way, another hotel guest closed their curtains. A flicker of TV light vanished with them. If she thought she'd buried me, she forgot one thing. I know how to unearth truth. Morning crept in through the thin hotel curtains, brushing the beige carpet in gray light. I sat at the desk in the corner, the air still heavy with yesterday's weight. I hadn't slept much. My body had rested, sure, but my mind had replayed 100 versions of how everything might have gone differently. None of them ended better. From the side pocket of my travel bag, I pulled out the envelope Vera had given me months before he passed. For after your last day, he'd written in his deliberate script. I had kept it unopened. I thought it was a note about retirement, maybe a dinner reservation, a sentimental joke, but now it felt heavier, and I needed to open it. Inside, the paper was neatly folded. His handwriting filled the page. He wrote of the life we'd built, of the house we paid off together, of our daughter. The money I saved should carry you into ease, not exile, he'd written. Promise me you'll use it for rest, not repair. I read the letter 3 times. Each word rang clear. He had trusted me to be safe when he could no longer protect me. I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. No tears, just a breath, a long one. By mid-morning, I met Callista at a coffee shop down the block. We took a table in the corner, away from the counter chatter and espresso wine. She didn't say much at first, just nodded while I slid the bank statements and Vera's letter across the table. I watched her jaw clench, then relax. She did all this under your nose, she murmured, and used your name to access it. I didn't answer. Callista tapped the papers once, twice. We'll open a forensic audit, not a move without documentation. You were betrayed, Sarah, but we'll do this clean. I nodded. That was all we needed, clarity, not chaos. Back at the hotel, the front desk clerk waved me down. Ma'am, someone dropped this off for you earlier. Left your name. He handed me a cardboard box sealed with clear tape. On the top, left by a family member. I brought it to the room, placed it on the bed, and carefully pulled the tape. Inside were fragments of my life, baby photos of Isolde, my wedding veil folded into tissue paper, and an old DVD labeled Family Vacations 2003. At the top was a pink sticky note in familiar handwriting. These things are nostalgic, not necessary. The note stayed between my fingers longer than I'd like to admit. I picked up a photo, Isolde at 5, face covered in frosting, laughing beside me in the kitchen. When did she stop being that girl? And when did I stop noticing? The silence of the room felt sharper now. I put the photo down gently and sat back, my palms flat on the cheap bedspread. 2 years ago, on my birthday, Isolde had invited me to dinner. She'd picked a rooftop restaurant downtown. At the end of the meal, she'd hugged me quickly, said she had to leave for a deadline. I had smiled, understanding. Later that night, scrolling social media out of habit, I saw photos of her at a gala, wine glass in hand, posed beside colleagues in designer gowns. That was the first time I knew, not suspected, knew. I had been slowly written out. Back then, I had convinced myself it wasn't personal. She was building a life. She was busy. I was just background. Now, I knew it had started long before that dinner. I opened my laptop and pulled up my records. One by one, I began documenting each point of financial contact. The time I gave her access to my emergency fund, just in case. The documents I emailed when I went in for minor surgery. The time she asked for my password because her own bank app was glitching. Then I found it. An archived email from 6 months ago. Subject line, Mom's passwords, backup. There it was, in her own words, her own timestamp. I stared at it for a long time, then whispered the only truth I hadn't yet said out loud. This betrayal didn't start yesterday. It started the moment I believed she needed me. Callie's office was quiet when we returned. She motioned me to the chair across from her desk and pulled out a legal pad, already half filled with notes. I placed my bag on the floor, sat down, and folded my hands. The letter from Vera was still in my purse. I hadn't taken it out again, but I felt its weight there, like an anchor reminding me not to drift. We start with breach of fiduciary trust, Callie said, flipping open her laptop. You gave her access for emergencies. This was not an emergency. This was extraction. I nodded. I want her to know I know, not from a lawyer, from me. She looked up. Are you sure? Yes. No threats, no emotion, just awareness. By late afternoon, I was back at the hotel, pacing the room. My phone was in my hand. I dialed her number. Isolde picked up after the third ring. Her voice was unnervingly smooth. Mom, I figured this would come. I'd like to meet, I said. Just the two of us. No need, she replied. I'll send you what I think you're owed. 2 hours later, an email landed in my inbox. The subject line read, Legacy Breakdown. It was a branded PDF with headers and color-coded sections. It looked like a business proposal. I opened it. The first page read, Emotional damages, recipient me. The next, primary financial provider, contributor, you. There was a graph, even a section labeled Resentment Accrued Over Time, 1998 to 2024. My mouth went dry. This wasn't an apology. It was a bill. I scrolled through it twice, each time feeling more like an investor being bought out of a failing company than a mother being recognized. I closed the laptop and sat back. The room felt smaller. Then I opened my email archive. I searched for messages from Isolde. They came up in neat rows, subject lines like Mom's docs, updated forms, you'll thank me later. Each one another breadcrumb I had missed. She'd been building a case, organizing access. This wasn't about care. It had never been about care. It was about control. I remembered one dinner in particular. She had asked me to co-sign on a vacation home. Just for tax purposes, she said. Your name helps with the loan rates. I declined, politely. She had smiled, tight-lipped, and never brought it up again. Back then, I thought it was just a suggestion. Now I saw it for what it was, a dry run, a test of boundaries, and I had passed it by failing. It wasn't that I didn't notice the signs. It's that I'd convinced myself they weren't real, that love, even when twisted, was still love. But no, it had turned into something else entirely, a transaction where the cost was my place in my own life. Around 11 that night, I sat back at the desk with a cup of peppermint tea and opened a blank document. Before I could type, a new message came through. Callie. Subject line, confirmed. The body read, she began moving documents and redirecting funds 26 months ago during the family reconciliation retreat. You were right. I stared at the screen, my heart slow but steady. Then I titled the document, Timeline of Extraction. If she wanted this to be war, she just got her first warning shot. 2 days had passed since I sent my first warning shot. The air in Callie's office felt thicker than usual, as if even the walls were holding their breath. We sat shoulder to shoulder in silence, surrounded by files, tabs open on screens, the soft buzz of her desktop humming in the background. This wasn't the kind of work I had done in courtrooms. This was deeper, slower, a different kind of fight, one that required precision, not passion. She spread the documents across the table, paper trails of accounts I didn't know were opened, withdrawals disguised under vague labels like liquid movement allocation. I traced the figures with my finger, each number like a breadcrumb on the path Isolde had laid out behind my back. If I wanted revenge, I'd scream, I said, almost to myself. But I want justice. Callie didn't look up. She didn't have to. Then we document, we structure, no holes, no heat, just facts. I opened the side drawer of my bag. Nestled, deep beneath legal pads and ink pens, was an old flash drive Vera had handed me years ago. Just in case, he'd said. At the time, I thought he meant power outages or losing track of tax forms. I plugged it into her laptop and waited. Folder by folder opened. Joint account statements, investment logs from the first years of our marriage, even scanned property deeds from our original home. And then it hit me. A PDF titled Co-Ownership Agreement, Laurent Residence. I opened it. The signature beside Isolde's wasn't mine. It mimicked my handwriting, but there were small inconsistencies. My L never looped that wide. The spacing between letters was off, but on paper, it looked legitimate enough. She forged my name, I whispered. Callie leaned in. You're sure? I nodded. That document was never signed by me. That signature was lifted, digitally, probably from one of our mortgage renewals. That, Callie said, makes it federal. Neither of us spoke for a minute. She began drafting a motion request while I organized the documents into folders. I labeled them cleanly: account access, property, identity, fraud. My hands didn't shake. My spine stayed straight. No leaks, I said. No warnings. Let her sleep thinking she's safe. That's the best kind of preparation, Callie replied, silent. Later that evening, I sat back on the hotel bed with my laptop open, scrolling through social media, not out of curiosity, out of habit. And there she was, Isolde, in a crisp linen blouse, standing in front of what used to be my home. Caption: new project underway, built on grit, not gifts. Grit, not gifts. My lip curled, but I didn't comment, didn't call. I stared at the image for a moment longer than I meant to. Let her have her audience. They'd clap for anything shiny, but they wouldn't be in the courtroom when the real work began. Keep smiling, Isolde, I whispered. You'll need it. By morning, I had everything packed into a plain manila envelope. Legal documents, timelines, photo evidence, no bows, no messages, no names on the front, just weight, plain and undeniable. I drove it myself to the courier's downtown office. The clerk barely glanced up when I handed it over. Destination, he asked. Travis County Courthouse. I so... no curtis turn label there. As I stepped back outside into the parking lot, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. From Isolde. We good now? No greeting, no explanation. Just the kind of text someone sends when they've won or thinks they have. I didn't reply. I already answered in court filings. It was Callie who called me first. Her voice, always composed, held a new edge. Sarah, I just got word. She's planning something. Tonight. A live stream. She's framing it as a family update. I exhaled slowly. Let her talk. Callie didn't pause. This isn't just talk. This is optics. You filed first, but she's spinning it first. It's not about facts. It's about what people believe before they even see evidence. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. We both knew how public image worked. Isolde was born with a sense for performance, and now she had a camera in her hand and a crowd at her feet. Callie offered to come over. I said no. I preferred to watch this one alone. That evening, I sat at the edge of the bed, laptop open, volume low. The live stream notification pinged at exactly 7 p.m. The title was polished, Building a Life Behind the Scenes. Isolde appeared on screen in a neutral-toned blouse, soft lighting, muted makeup. Behind her, the familiar backsplash of my old kitchen, now her stage. She spoke slowly, with purpose. We all carry wounds, she said, and sometimes we inherit more than just property. We inherit pressure, expectations, guilt. She paused. But we also have the power to choose something better. She never mentioned me by name. She didn't need to. Terms like toxic support and emotional debt hung in the air like perfume. Pleasant to those who liked the scent, suffocating to those who knew its source. In the comments, people cheered her resilience, called her brave. Some offered prayers. Others sent heart emojis and hashtags. No one asked where her mother was. No one wondered who paid for the house behind her. I closed the laptop, not in anger, in exhaustion. This wasn't just narrative, it was theater. And she had the audience clapping. Later that night, as I made tea in the hotel room's kitchenette, my phone lit up with a message from my cousin Lydia. You okay? It read. No context, just that. I opened the family group chat. There it was, a photo of me exiting the courthouse, taken from across the street. The caption above it read, Mom insists on turning everything into drama. Pray for her mental health. It was posted by Isolde. No shame, no hesitation, just another scene in her carefully crafted story. I didn't reply, not in the group anyway. Instead, I messaged Lydia directly. Thanks for asking. I'm fine. Let truth speak when it must. Then I opened my email and wrote to Callie, double the evidence back up. I'm done being polite. There was no panic, no flurry of emotion, just clarity settling into place, like bricks in a wall I should have started building years ago. By morning, I was at the hotel's business center, printing every screenshot, comments from the live stream, time-stamped edits, the group chat post, everything. I printed her caption in bold, circled it with a red marker. At the end, I paused the video mid-sentence. Isolde's face frozen on screen, eyes earnest, mouth parted as she said, built on grit, not guilt. I studied her expression. It was calculated, rehearsed, familiar. You want a stage, Isolde? I whispered to no one. I'll give you one, in court. She used a live stream to bury me. I'll use it to resurrect the truth. The post had already gone viral by the time I found it. Callie hadn't even had a chance to warn me. There it was, floating across my feed, a perfectly lit photo of Isolde standing in front of the house I built, champagne in hand, head tilted just so. The caption read, To everyone who helped me get here, my mentors, my third-grade teacher, even Miss Patty from next door who used to sneak me cookies. You believed in me before I did. There was no mention of her mother, not a word about the woman who paid for that front porch, or the one who braided her hair before every school picture. Not a trace of the person who gave her a name, a roof, a launch pad. I reread the caption, hoping I'd missed something. I hadn't. The photo had thousands of likes, hundreds of comments. So proud of you. Self-made queen. You did it all on your own. That last one stuck in my throat, on your own. An hour later, a message from Joyce, my old neighbor, pinged in. Sarah, did you know she's been telling people she bought the house from a stranger? I blinked. What? Joyce followed with a screenshot. Isolde, answering a question in the comments. I got really lucky. Found a listing right before it hit the market. It's been a dream. No mention of inheritance. No mention of trust. Just a listing. Then came another message, this time from an acquaintance at the county clerk's office. FYI, it read. The house is still partially in your name. Public records don't lie. That night, the air in the hotel room felt too still. I opened my banking app to check the litigation escrow Callie had secured. It was untouched. But another notification blinked at the top of the screen. Suspicious login attempt detected. IP, Austin, TX. I clicked into it. The attempt had been flagged by the fraud detection system we activated weeks ago. The device ID matched one of Isolde's older laptops, an email address she'd once used for family photo backups. She was still trying to reach into my accounts, still pressing, but this time the system logged everything. Timestamp, location, fail password, even the browser used. She hadn't covered her tracks. She hadn't expected I'd be watching. Back at Callie's office the next day, we sat across from each other, documents spread out like puzzle pieces. We began aligning timelines when I'd first shared a password, when the money started moving, the week she had me sign what I thought were vacation home documents. Callie tapped a pen to a spreadsheet. She escalated the narrative. We escalate the truth. I nodded. Let her build the stage. We'll let the truth perform. That evening, I scrolled back through her gratitude post. It had now been shared by influencers and even quoted in a local magazine article about young professionals overcoming generational wounds. There was a pull quote beside her photo. Some of us weren't born into legacy. We had to carve our own. It took everything in me not to comment, not to scream. Instead, I stood in the business center of the hotel and fed page after page into the printer. Screenshots of the post, legal titles with my name still inked in bold, system alerts, login logs, her old emails. Each printout landed face down in a folder I labeled in red pen, Witness Packet A, for court and press. She wrote me out of her story. Now I'll make sure the world reads the full version. The envelope was ivory, with a wax seal that felt theatrical. I knew before opening it that it wasn't really an invitation. It was a setup. Isolde's uncle, Greg, had written in flowery script, "Join us for a dinner of healing and reconciliation." The word reconciliation was underlined. I almost laughed. Still, I went. I wore a navy blouse, minimal jewelry, and brought nothing but my purse. My presence was my message. I had no intention of raising my voice. I wasn't there to argue. I was there to end the charade. The dinner was hosted at Greg's home, a wide ranch-style house with a wraparound porch and a table long enough to seat 12. Isolde arrived late, of course, floating in like it was a photo shoot. She kissed cheeks, complimented dresses, poured wine with a smile so wide it should have cracked. The evening rolled on with surface-level chatter. Greg made a toast about healing through honesty. Someone asked Isolde about her growing following on social media. She demurred, modestly, of course. I said nothing. Then, just before dessert, Greg leaned in and said, "Sarah, maybe now's a good time to clear the air. We've all felt the tension." I stood up slowly, steady as I could. "You're right," I said, pulling a folder from my purse. Inside were 10 identical envelopes. "I brought something," I added, handing one to each guest. Chairs squeaked, fingers fumbled. I watched as they opened the envelopes, read the contents. No one spoke at first. A fork clattered to the floor. Inside, screenshots of digital transfers, emails about password resets, financial timelines annotated by Callie. One envelope included a full transcript from a family retreat recording 2 years ago. In it, Isolde is quoted saying, "I can't grow until I cut the financial umbilical." And then, from her ex-girlfriend, a detailed email dated last fall. She told me the plan. She called it the clean extraction. Said her mom wouldn't even see it coming. Silence. One cousin stared at the documents, jaw slack. Another rubbed his forehead, looking anywhere but at Isolde. She tried to laugh. "This is so dramatic, Mom. I don't even know where you got half of this." Greg, to his credit, didn't smile. He glanced at the transcript, then looked at me. "You shouldn't have had to bring this to dinner." I didn't answer. I wasn't there for validation. I was there for air. The truth needed a place to breathe. The conversation fell apart after that. People excused themselves early. The energy in the room shifted from forced pleasantry to pointed avoidance. Isolde busied herself stacking plates she had no intention of washing. On my way out, Greg walked me to the driveway. We didn't speak. His grip on my elbow as he said goodbye lingered just long enough to mean something. Outside, the night air was thick and quiet. Isolde followed, heels clicking too fast. "You think you've won something?" she hissed under her breath. "You're still alone." I turned steady. "No," I said. But I stopped losing. Behind her, Greg stood in the doorway, his hand resting on the frame, not to hold it open, but to hold her back. They came to watch me fold. Instead, they watched her fall. The morning light stretched across the carpet like a silent audience. My phone buzzed once, then again. I glanced at the screen. 42 missed calls, all from one name, Isolde. There were no voicemails, no texts, just those red bubbles, stacked like guilt. I stared at them until the numbers blurred. Then I set the phone face down on the counter and poured hot water over the tea bag I'd set out the night before. The first sip of tea felt earned. I hadn't done anything spectacular. I hadn't screamed or burned bridges. But I had told the truth. And when truth finally has an audience, even silence feels like thunder. Later that day, a local news outlet picked up the story. Not the live stream, not the Instagram captions. This time, the facts. Legal battle between former PR exec and mother over misappropriated retirement funds. It was dry, clinical, just a few paragraphs, but it was enough. By noon, I had messages flooding in, former coworkers, distant cousins, people I hadn't heard from in years. "I'm so sorry. You didn't deserve that. I should have checked in sooner." Not one asked if it was true. The story had reached them not as gossip, but as confirmation. That stung more than I expected. They had suspected all along, but it took a headline for them to say it out loud. I didn't reply to most of them. What was there to say? The people who stayed quiet while I unraveled were the same ones offering condolences now that I'd survived the fire. A few days passed. On Wednesday afternoon, I got a call from an old friend who still worked in communications. "Thought you'd want to know," she said gently. Isolde's profile disappeared from her firm's website. No announcement, just gone. I thanked her, even though my chest tightened. This wasn't the kind of satisfaction I expected. There was no triumph in it, just a quiet ache. She wanted so badly to shine, and she burned everything down to stand in the light. That evening, Greg knocked on my hotel door. He carried a small velvet pouch in one hand and a look I couldn't read in the other. "This was your mother's," he said, simply. "Isolde had it. I thought you should have it back." I opened the pouch, my mother's locket, the one she wore every Sunday. I hadn't even realized it was missing. Greg didn't offer excuses. He didn't explain how it got into Isolde's hands. He just looked at me and said, "You were right not to yell." He left before I could thank him. I held the locket in my palm for a while, running my thumb over the worn engraving. It didn't feel like closure, but it did feel like gravity had shifted slightly in my favor. As I walked him out, the sun had already dipped behind the rooftops. The sky turned that familiar shade of blue that only Texas spring evenings can offer. Soft, forgiving. My phone buzzed again. It was another message from her. "Please, just one talk." I didn't think it'd go this far. I read it once. Then again, I didn't reply. I didn't feel anger, not this time. Just the certainty that some bridges once crossed with fire don't get rebuilt. I watched the last of the light fade from the sky. Some apologies are meant for the mirror, not for me. The email came first, a terse announcement sent to Isolde's PR firm mailing list. Effective immediately, Ms. Isolde Laurent is no longer affiliated with the agency. We wish her well in future endeavors. I read it twice, once with disbelief, then again with the full weight of what it meant. They hadn't made a public statement, not yet, but inside the circles that mattered, her name was being quietly removed. By noon, the whispers had started. Former colleagues I hadn't spoken to in years emailed apologies that rang hollow. "We had no idea. You've always carried yourself with such grace. I should have reached out sooner." They waited until I won to say they believed me. Later that week, we stood in the courtroom. Pre-trial hearing. The air felt colder than outside, as if the fluorescent lights carried judgment. Isolde sat at the far table, smaller than I remembered, shoulders drawn inward. She didn't look at me once. Callie sat beside me, calm and anchored, and a young associate to her right organized our exhibits. The judge reviewed the submissions, each one clicking into the record like a gavel finding its rhythm. When they reached the email logs, there were murmurs. One juror pressed his lips together. Another looked sideways toward Isolde's table. The moment felt surgical, precise, quiet, irreversible. After we stepped outside, Callie turned to me gently. "You're going to win this." I nodded. "I know. But that doesn't mean it'll feel good." I smiled, not because it was funny, but because it was true. Some victories don't fill the silence they leave behind. The lobby hummed with footsteps and distant phones ringing. No one stopped us. No one offered congratulations. That night, back at the hotel, I found 2 letters slid under my door, both in handwritten envelopes. One from a cousin who had sat quietly through every family dinner. The other from my brother's wife, who had once told me to give Isolde some space. Each letter was full of regret, acknowledgement, apologies. I read them without tears, not because I didn't feel anything, but because the ache had gone hollow. Not hate, not satisfaction, just the awareness that even silence could arrive too late to be meaningful. "It's not hate I feel," I whispered to no one. "It's hollowness." I left the letters unopened on the nightstand. Later that evening, as I returned from dinner with Callie, I found a small brown package leaning against my hotel door. No postage, no name, just my room number. I carried it inside carefully, sat down at the table, and peeled away the tape. Inside, wrapped in soft fabric, was the scrapbook I'd made for Isolde's high school graduation. I hadn't seen it in years. The cover had a photo of her at 5, beaming with her front teeth missing. I turned the pages slowly. Camp photos, birthday cards, pressed flowers from our trip to Yosemite. There was no note, no message, just a small corner of one page, dog-eared. I turned to it. There we were, on the beach. I was holding her, sunburned and smiling, her arms wrapped tight around my neck. She was maybe 7. The tide rolled in behind us. Someone had written on the photo's border in gel pen, her handwriting, "Best day ever." She sent back the past. What she doesn't know is, I've already let it go. The letter came mid-morning, delivered not by post, but by courier. No return address, just my name written in Isolde's handwriting, rounded, careful, like she used to write birthday cards when she was 12. I opened it at the small table in my hotel room, beside an untouched cup of coffee. The pages smelled faintly of lavender. Her words stumbled between apology and explanation. She didn't beg, but she did ask. I'm not asking for a reset, just a chance to be heard one more time. She mentioned memories, baking brownies, the beach trip when she broke her toe, prom dress shopping. She wrote of regrets, carefully placed regrets. I read it twice, out loud the second time, not because I needed to hear it in her voice. I couldn't anymore, but because sometimes speaking something makes it settle differently in your chest. I didn't cry. I looked out the window while holding the paper, remembering the child who used to fall asleep with her cheek pressed to my shoulder on long car rides, the same one who once said, "I love you more than peanut butter," and believed it with her whole heart. She remembers pieces, but I carried the whole. That afternoon, I sat on the edge of the bed with the scrapbook she'd returned, the same one I had filled with first-day photos and glued down report cards, the one I found outside my hotel room last week. I didn't open it. Instead, I wrapped it in brown paper, tucked it in a mailer envelope, and slid a sticky note on top that read, "Some things can't be mended, but I'm no longer bleeding." I walked it to the front desk and asked them to send it back to her. No signature, no return address. I didn't need another round of shared air and split explanations. She had her chance. She'd used it. By early evening, I found myself walking the paths of Zilker Park, the wind warm against my cheek, the laughter of children nearby, high and carefree. I sat on a bench, watched a toddler chasing bubbles, and let myself cry for 3 minutes. Then I breathed out, not in surrender, not in pain, just to let it go. I am not returning to a fire just because it begs for water. That night, I skipped dinner, brewed chamomile instead. I sat by the window with my feet tucked under me, looking out at the darkening city. Lights flickered on in hotel rooms across the way. The world moved on. My phone rang, a number I didn't recognize. I answered. "Ms. Laurent?" It was a man's voice, polished, professional. "I'm calling from the courthouse." "Yes?" "I wanted to inform you that your daughter's legal team filed a motion to withdraw. She may not appear next week." The line went quiet for a second, waiting for my response. I said nothing. I was holding a mug of tea I'd forgotten to sweeten. I took a sip anyway. The trial may end without her, but I've already faced everything I needed to. The courtroom was almost too quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't comfort. It hovers, thick and expectant. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, eyes on the judge, who didn't look at me or at the empty defense table across the aisle. He read the ruling evenly. Restitution ordered. Civil liability confirmed. The timeline of extraction acknowledged and upheld. Isolde didn't come. I didn't expect her to. When the final papers were signed, I didn't smile. I didn't cry either. I just breathed in and out, as if my lungs were relearning what peace felt like when it wasn't borrowed from someone else's silence. Outside the courthouse, a small cluster of reporters stood behind the barriers. I knew they'd been briefed, and I saw them shift when I stepped out. One raised a mic, another snapped a photo. "Ms. Laurent, do you have a statement?" I shook my head gently. It was never about the money. Then I walked past them, the sky above, gray and low. But I felt strangely lighter, like something had finally exhaled inside me after holding its breath for too long. Back at the house, the temporary one, I found another letter. The envelope was familiar, her handwriting again. I didn't open it. Instead, I stepped into the backyard, where a small fire pit waited, built of old brick. I didn't hesitate. I lit a match, fed the envelope to the flame, and watched as the paper curled, darkened, and vanished into ash. Some things don't deserve one more word. I said it out loud, to the wind, to myself, to whoever might have been listening. The next morning, I started something new. I met with a local nonprofit director and shared an idea, a housing fund, small but real, for women over 50 who had been displaced by family, by divorce, by betrayal. They called it Laurent's Light. I insisted the name belonged to my mother. She never got to own property. She cleaned houses that didn't belong to her. I figured if I could rewrite the narrative, even in part, that was enough. My home was stolen, I told the room, but I built a shelter out of it. There was no applause, just nods. The kind of nods that come from people who've survived the quiet, too. That evening, I kicked off my shoes and walked barefoot through the garden behind the house. It was nothing like the one I lost, smaller, wilder, but it was mine. I poured a cup of tea and didn't add sugar. I didn't need it. My phone buzzed on the patio table. I didn't check it. Instead, I turned it off. Birdsong filled the space around me, louder than any apology, any courtroom, any spotlight. It was the only audience I needed. She silenced me once. Now I choose my own quiet. Sometimes the loudest justice is the one that doesn't need to be heard. If there's one thing this chapter of my life taught me, it's that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers in quiet choices, in walking away, in protecting your peace, even when no one applauds you for it. I didn't set out to destroy anyone. I set out to stop the destruction of myself. And that's a boundary I hope every woman, every parent learns to hold. You don't have to reconcile with someone just because they regret what they did. Forgiveness isn't an open door. It's a decision about what you're still willing to carry. Me? I set it down. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to choose silence over conflict? Have you walked away from a relationship that no longer saw your worth? If this story moved you, drop a 1 in the comments or tell me where you're watching from. And if it didn't, I'd love to hear why. Let's keep this space honest and healing. If you want more stories like this, real, raw, and rooted in truth, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps these voices reach the people who need them most.